Now, the audience needs to know that there will be some terms used. Don't be scared. Don't be afraid of these terms. These are the standard terms to let you know that Dr. Jones understands what he's talking about, is familiar with the technical literature, but the point he's going to make is that this living system could not have developed into the progressive living system as the evolutionary community postulates and now asserts. Dr. Jones, tell us why you came to the program.
Carl, I'd like, as you pointed out, the name of the program is The Gaps Are Enormous, and that's what we want to show the audience. Back when I was at the university and was being trained in the discipline of geology and a subtitle under it, paleontology, they told us the gaps were there, and every now and then they would show us fossils where we could see a gap, but no one really elaborated on it. It was glossed over.
Yes.
And what I want the audience to see is we have several examples. All the gaps are not as large. I want to show them a good grouping, and we want you to, the audience to understand that most of the gaps are as large as the first one we're going to show, okay? But some of them aren't that large, so we want to be fair, and we'll show one that's not quite that obvious.
But even with the gaps that are not as large as the first you're going to show, there is no way that living system is similar to other living systems because of similar design. You know, Buicks are similar to Lincolns that are similar to Toyotas because the design works.
Right.
And living systems have similarity because the creator knew the design would work.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean something rather similar is its prototype.
Exactly. The first one I'd like for the audience to see is Saltopasuchus. Now there's a big mouthful for you.
That's a $25
That's
word.
a $25 word. Saltopasuchus was something we called a thecodont, and I'm not going to bother them with that. It had to do with the ruling reptiles, and this is where they began down at the bottom, okay? And he was about 4 feet long, and supposedly we found him back in the Triassic about 220 million years ago. And the audience will notice that according to Romer, now Alfred Romer wrote the basic vertebrate paleontology book that has been used and used and used. It was the one I used at the university when I studied vertebrate paleontology.
And as the audience needs to know that, Floyd, as you used 220 million years ago, those are simply assigned ages.
Right.
There is no evidence that any of the rocks are considerably older than any of the other rocks. But those
Correct.
are the ages. We want the audience to know we understand the
that
concept.
Evolution is assigned to it. Correct, Carl. And what I want them to notice is Saltopasuchus, this little beast, is, and in paleontology, among ourselves, we joke and call them beast. We like to even call the micro fossils, the ones you have to see through a microscope, you know, at about 20 power. We call them beasts, you know, when we're joking amongst ourselves. But this creature is supposed to be the ancestor of dinosaurs, birds, reptiles, and pterosaurs. Now, for the audience to know, dinosaurs are strictly only land creatures, okay? Regular, normal human beings are used to calling the ones in the ocean and the ones that flew dinosaurs also. But in paleontology, the ones in the ocean are called marine reptiles, such as mosasaurs, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, etc. But the ones that flew, the pterosaurs, are flying reptiles. In other words, they're reptiles, okay? Now, this is what he looked like. How large is the gap? What is his, in the fossil record, what's the next one up? Now, when it says pterosaurs, they're really divided into two main groups. One's the Rhamphorhynchids, and we'll be looking at him down at the bottom in a moment. The other are the Pteranodon group, which are pterodactyls, okay? So I could have shown that as well, but this one gets it just as well.
Certainly.
Supposedly then, Saltopasuchus, after 50 million years, has shrunk in length. Notice he's only about 1.5 feet long. He was nearly 4 feet. This is supposed to be evolution happening. We're getting bigger and better and more complex, supposedly. Okay. Notice that he's lost his 5th finger, and his 4th finger has grown all the way down to here so that it supports this leathery-like wing structure. And right. Now, the same thing is true on the pterodactyls. In other words, their 4th finger has grown also. And all this has happened while Saltopasuchus evolved, supposedly, into Rhamphorhynchus. Now, Carl, let's take a look at our comparison. When we put them right beside each other, the audience will observe their obvious near kinship. And let me point out just a few things quickly. Notice on Saltopasuchus, his rear legs are much more developed, much larger than his forelimbs.
Yes.
However, in Rhamphorhynchus, and the same thing would be true of the pterodactyls, his hind legs are much less in development
Certainly.
and size than the forelimbs.
other dominant forelimbs,
That's
yes.
quite a change. Not to mention, as we said, how long the fourth finger has grown. And look at
Now,
this
this fourth finger developed from
this.
that little
Yes. And
appendage.
now, the audience needs to remember, there is not one single fossil between here and here.
The intermediate
There are no transitional
or
forms.
intermediates by the tens of thousands
Right.
would be required.
Right. And so think, and what would half of a wing be? In other words, if you took this creature, and while he's trying to develop into this through evolution, we get to a halfway point, you see, he would be dragging around something that doesn't fly. He's lost his ability, his hind legs that he used to run and catch prey and flee from predators, okay, that might be larger than he, have now, they're halfway between here and here. He has no chance.
You've just made a major statement.
He can't run away and he can't fly.
No, that development, and there is no intermediate, not even a slight intermediate hint
No.
of development. If there were, he would become extinct, and there's not the potential for his genetics to produce anything more complex
Exactly,
than he.
Carl. Now, one other major point. As a paleontologist, I play with bones, okay? I see fossils, and when we get into, amphibians or reptiles or mammals or man, well, I only have bones to play with pretty much, okay? But I want to remind our audience, as they see the obvious difference in the bone structure, okay, that we're not just talking about bones. See, to go from here to here, anatomically, think of the change in the lungs, for example,
Yes.
to go from this lung to a lung capacity where the air comes in through different number of chambers, where he can fly. The keel has to develop, on and on, different structures.
Major structural
Major
design.
structural differences have to occur. The next one I would like to show the audience is this 35 million years ago is what MYA stands for. That's the Eocene. We have our specific example is only 50 feet long, but they became as large as 70 feet long. This is Basilosaurus, and the older name that I learned him under was Zeuglodon.
Now, for the audience, that's simply a whale.
That's a whale. And supposedly, he developed from Masonics, which looked like this, which is, as the audience can see, a hairy four-legged land mammal that was about 5 feet long, and National Geographic told us that this is supposedly the ancestor of the whale.
In fact, Stephen Jay Gould mentioned before his demise that Charles Darwin did state in one of his editions of Origin of Species that he could readily imagine this creature, a mammal, walking into a miry area of a swamp that later was inundated by larger dimensions of water, and in his lifetime developing the ability to adapt underwater. That is completely unscientific, unjustified, and absolutely ridiculous.
The breathing apparatus would be so different, it's just unbelievable. Not to mention the appendages, the ligaments that are holding, the blood vessels are going in different places in different directions. But the point I want the audience to see, because to me it's obvious, that the gaps are enormous. Notice that to go from here to here, there is no science involved, no real science. It's strictly imagination.
It's a stretch of the ludicrous.
Exactly the same kind of imagination and let's pretend that we see in the difference from Saltopasuchus to Rhamphorhynchus.
Floyd, the gaps are enormous.
They are enormous. Carl, let's show them the next one. Pachycetus. Now, all we found originally were the bones in blue, and the teeth. All right, now that's what they had. Now the evolution involved in this, the actual evolution, I want the audience to see is the dates.